Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people on purpose follow orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, we've got people fighting back against lazy Karen bosses, power-tripping principals being dealt with, smug college professors getting embarrassed, and one OP tells a story about a public transit creep getting exactly what he asked for. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories today. Don't shake your heads too hard, and as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Recently, I was explaining to my mom what malicious compliance was, and she reminded me of this story. I was a senior in high school when all of a sudden I got sick at school, and I had to be sent home. Because my car was in the shop, my mom had to come get me. It's about 9:30 a.m. when this happened. As we're driving up a very busy street, we see two 7 to 8-year-old kids who we'll call Frank and Zelda trying to cross. Worried, my mom pulls over to see what's going on. The conversation went roughly as follows. Mom asked, "Kids, are you okay? What are you two doing here?" Frank says, "Principal Idiot said we can't come to school early, so he sent us home." Now, Mom's very familiar with Principal Idiot. He was the principal at the elementary school that my younger brother's attending at the time. My brother was going through some behavioral issues at the time, and Mom was commonly called to the office, to the point that they were on a first-name basis. Not that he allowed her to use his first name because, quote, "I have a doctorate in education, so it's Dr. So-and-so to you." So in other words, the guy was an entitled idiot. There was a gas station 10 feet away, so Mom tells Frank and Zelda to meet us there. We pulled in, got some water for the kids as it was a hot day, and Mom calls Principal Idiot's cell phone. Again, the conversation went roughly as follows. My mom says, "Hi, this is Mark's mom. I have two kids here named Frank and Zelda, and they say they were sent home early." Principal Idiot says, "Yes, their parents dropped them off at 6 a.m. because they had to work. Of course, we're not a daycare, so I told the kids to go home and wait for the bus." Hearing him say that, my mom says, "Are you kidding me? We're 5 miles away from the school. They walked all that way. It's a wonder they weren't hit by a car or kidnapped." That's when Principal Idiot says, "What are you going to do about it? Are you going to call the cops? Go ahead." Hearing him say that, Mom was absolutely floored, but she decides to give him a nice dose of reality. At the time, we lived in a small town. And how small, you ask? So small that sometimes the chief of police would have to walk the beat. And that day, he happened to be a block or so away from the gas station. When he got the call, he arrived. He then got the whole story from not only Frank and Zelda, but from my mom and me. And the thing is, being a father of two elementary-aged kids himself, he was pissed. He looked at my mom and said, "It's time I had some words with Principal Idiot." The chief of police then drove Frank and Zelda to school in the squad car. He personally escorts them to their class, and then marches to Principal Idiot's office and proceeds to tear him a new one, telling him that he would help the parents press charges on him for child endangerment, among other things. From that day on, Frank and Zelda were allowed to be at the school early on the days their parents had to work early. Yeah, that was a beautiful malicious compliance. And guys, it's always funny to me when somebody does something crappy and casually suggests, "Call the cops." It's like they think that surely nobody would ever dare to do such a thing. But yeah, maybe Principal Idiot could have shown a bit more compassion, like maybe open the school doors and have the kids sit in the office reading a book or something, not send them on a 5-mile walk back home, all because school isn't free daycare. That said though, I also feel the parents should have found an alternative for morning care, not just drop off the kids at 6 a.m. Like if you're talking child endangerment, maybe speak to the parents about this as well. Guys, let me know your thoughts. So let me set the scene. It's April 2016. My company's received their customer service scores for the last 12 months, and it's mostly good, except for one department that's just below the expected level set by the company. Unfortunately, I work in that department. Now, this was anticipated by just about everyone in our department because most of our queries and complaints pertains to the cost of work we do. a cost decided by the finance department, who are separate to us and aren't customer-facing, so they don't have to deal with issues caused by these costs. The results are announced on the internal website with a small note from the head of customer service, who we'll call Karen. Reading the message, it's clear she's very happy with the results until she reaches ours. Now, I'm not gonna post what she said, as it would be very clear who I am if somebody from work was to read this. But let's just say it was incredibly unprofessional, and it threw us completely under the bus in front of the entire company. Our manager then invites her to come and spend the day with us to see what we're up against, but she declines. And this pisses me off because I see how hard the guys work every single day, and there's no way she's gonna treat them like that. I'm also a sucker for holding a grudge. Fast forward a bit, and it's now 2018. She's blown over $100,000 trying to increase our satisfaction scores by investing it in the wrong areas and ignoring the real problem, which remains the price. Rather than take the blame herself, she puts it on her team and somehow gets away with it. It gets to the point where she needs some results and she has an idea, but it involves giving us more work on top of our ridiculous workloads. In fact, by doing what she wanted, we would be slower at completing the rest of our work, which would only have a negative impact on our scores, but she doesn't seem to get this. Needless to say, it fails, and who gets the blame? Not her. At this point, Karen has no idea that I read that note 2 years ago, and she certainly wouldn't expect me to have remembered it for this long. Like I say, I'm a sucker for holding a grudge. She then calls to speak to my manager, but I'm covering. She says she needs us to come up with an idea that she can put to the board of directors 2 weeks after the call. But she's going on holiday for 10 days, and she won't be able to look into an idea herself. At this point, I see what's happening. She wants me to come up with an idea, and if successful, she takes the credit. If it fails, I take the blame. I told her it's not my responsibility, but she insists. She says if my manager isn't around, then I'm going to need to take this on. She says to me, I'll leave this in your hands. You email me, but only when you've come up with something you think will work, and I will go over it. There's no deadline, even though I know there's one. But she just said, when I come up with something I think will work. I can do that. Cue the malicious compliance. She comes back from holiday, and I've taken 2 weeks off. I've only been off for 2 days, and I won't be back for another 12. I come back to work to find out that she crapped the bed in her meeting with the board because she didn't even have half an idea, let alone one that would even work. She makes eye contact with me, and she asked what I'm playing at and why I didn't do what she asked. I said I hadn't come up with an idea I thought would work yet. She then tells me that there was a deadline, but I let her know that she hadn't told me that. She just said to offer my idea when I thought I'd found one that would work, which I still hadn't. I was doing exactly what she asked. The board were obviously pissed, and she was livid at me. And they revisited the situation with the $100,000 where her team practically threw her under the bus like she had with my department. She was put under review, and she ends up being removed from her job role. Not being sacked, but no longer being in a position where she can F people over when she doesn't perform, which was absolutely beautiful. Don't you just love stories where lazy, entitled bosses get exactly what they deserve? And what baffles me is that Karen didn't even try to come up with an idea. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if she used subordinates to come up with ideas all her life in order to get where she's at. But yeah, what a compliance that is, and I only wish I could see her face when OP called her out and she couldn't do a damn thing about it. Well, you told me to offer you an idea when I had one. I just haven't had time to think about one, quite honestly. Because it's your job, Karen. This happened several years ago. After onboarding a new job, I was told that I could hire an assistant. The HR director, Karen, hands me a stack of resumes, and she told me about a friend's daughter, and she bumped this girl, who we'll call Kat, to the top of my interview list. Kat passes the tech test with high scores, and she interviewed well, so I hired her. Kat showed up to work on time, had a good attitude, performed well on assignments, and she was generally a pleasant person all around. After probation, Kat was excited to tell me that her last raise was enough to get an apartment with her boyfriend. It was a couple of months after her raise that I started noticing Karen spending a lot of time talking to Kat. The conversation sounded personal and cordial, and Karen was friends with Kat's mom, so I didn't think much about it. Until one day, Karen barges into my office. She says to me, "Did you know that Kat moved into an apartment with her boyfriend?" I respond, "I might have heard something about that." She then says, "Well, Kat's pregnant and her mom is devastated." She then proceeds to fill me in on the details of Kat's personal life. Uncomfortably, I interrupt, acting like I have a lot going on. I tell her this really isn't any of my business. If there's something related to Kat's performance that we need to discuss, please fill me in. But as for me, Kat's doing a great job. A few months pass, and Kat's baby bump is starting to show. Karen is again in my office, and she says, "Hey, so Kat is not in compliance with the dress code." The last staff meeting, Karen handed out a dress code policy with a collage of various women's shoes and dresses and suits, presumably cut from fashion magazines, to assist us to determine what was acceptable and what was not. I picked up the policy and the clip art sheets. I asked, is she wearing something that's not allowed in the clippings, as I begin to spread the clip art around my desk. Karen says she's not wearing maternity clothes, hello, as she points to the bullet about maternity clothes in the policy. I tell her, well, the policy clearly says maternity wear is allowed. Kat is clearly pregnant and she's wearing clothes, so... Karen stops me right there and she says, "You know what I mean when I say maternity clothes. Clothes that come from a maternity store." I told Karen that I would talk to Kat, which I did. Kat filled me in that there was some drama with her mom not liking her boyfriend that Karen's involved in. I just told her to read the policy and to be sure she complies, and no matter what, to trust me. I had her back. The next day, Karen's in my office again, telling me that Kat is again not in compliance with the dress code. At this point, Karen knows I'm getting frustrated. I tell her, okay, I'll talk to her again. This time, I want you present because I'm going to give her a formal warning and assign remedial training. I then bring Kat into my office with Karen present, and I formally read off my prepared statement, making it clear that it will go into her permanent file. I say out loud, "Kat, you were given a verbal warning yesterday to comply with this dress code. Because it's not clear to me what is or isn't a violation of this policy, you're to report to the HR office 10 minutes early every morning for the next 2 weeks for a dress code inspection. Report to me if HR finds your dress unfit. If you're found to be in violation of this policy and you're unable to correct your dress before the start of the workday, your employment will be terminated immediately." By the time I'm finished, Kat's tearing up and Karen is staring at the floor and she's speechless. I dismiss Kat. I then say, I hope this is the last I'll ever hear about this, because if I do, I will fire her. Karen, speechless, just walks out of my office. I then call Kat into my office to speak with her. I told Kat to not worry about any of this. We have them right where we want them. So for a week, Kat reported to me that her clothes were fine per HR inspection. At the beginning of the second week, she was chuckling when she came to my office. She said to me, "Karen told me that I actually look very nice today." Attitudes began to change and everyone was smiling. I then get called to the red carpet office by Jim, the CEO. He tried to keep a straight face as he recited what he heard was going on, and he asked me to cut the remedial training short because it was embarrassing the HR staff. With a straight face, I said, "Well, Jim, if I were to stop the remedial training, I would have to fire Kat, as company policy clearly states that failure to complete a formal remediation plan is immediate termination. It's very clear. There's zero tolerance." Jim says, "You can't fire a pregnant woman for what she wears." I'm telling you to stop. I respond, "Stop following company policy?" With a laugh, he concedes, and he says, "Okay, I'm rescinding that ridiculous dress code policy, effective immediately." Okay, I have read a lot of malicious compliance regarding dress codes, but this one has gotta be one of my favorites. Like, the way Opie pulled this off and he played Little Miss HR Karen was perfect, wasn't it? Like, it went from "I hate what she wears" to "Oh, she looks lovely, please don't fire her." With that said though, it seems like Karen wasn't doing a great job in her position, right? Because I'm pretty sure that much of Karen's sharing would be a big no-no in a lot of workplaces. Like, you don't share personal information about an employee to anyone, especially not her boss. And while we're on the topic of sharing personal information, listen to this next post, guys. It's ridiculous. Before we begin, I have to explain what a genogram is. A genogram is like a family tree, but with extra symbols. Like, for example, a beer bottle from my alcoholic father, and lines connecting each person. The type of line dictates the type of relationship: close, smothering, distant, estranged, abusive, etc. With that said, I studied social work in school. I found myself doing 3 genograms over the course of my schooling. One for Intro to Social Work, one for Sociology of Mental Health, and then another in my last year. I also have some not fun family history and trauma, so these assignments were never my favorite. But my teachers for the first 2 didn't pressure me to disclose anything I didn't want to, only what I wanted and to be vague. One even said that I could do a fictional family. The last one, however, did not. You see, one thing we learned was that bringing up a client's trauma outside of a therapeutic environment can be harmful. We were social workers, which are not qualified therapists. During intakes and assessments, we've learned to tell clients that they don't have to give more details than they want to. There's a whole list of reasons behind this, but I'll spare you all the lecture. I brought this up in class after the teacher assigned an extensive genogram, with an accompanying 5-page essay on what we learned about ourselves. A third of the class did express some concerns. His reasoning was, you might be doing this with your clients, and you shouldn't ask them to do anything you wouldn't yourself. Not unless I get a graduate degree and become a therapist or psychologist. The teacher also didn't give us an answer when asked if resources for therapy would be provided, if this brought up any students' past trauma that they needed to talk about. Oh, and of course, he adds, this will only be shared with me and is 100% confidential, unless you choose to share. Literally not any of our concerns, but I don't want to share any of my deeply personal business with this man. The assignment didn't bother me as much as the hypocrisy of it all. I said, between class assignments and therapy, this will be my 5th one. Could I just turn one of those in and be given an alternate assignment? He wouldn't budge. He then said I don't need to disclose anything I didn't want to, but followed up with, but I expect you to take this assignment seriously. When I turned in a draft with about as much as I was willing to disclose, he said it wasn't detailed enough. Do it again. At this point I thought, alright, you mother effer, it's showtime. I have a lot of family trauma that's not mine to disclose, and I rarely ever disclose it. At least, not with anyone who would ever meet the folks involved. My own is embarrassing enough, but definitely not as bad as some. But I put all that crap on there and wrote about it. And then, the following week, the teacher asked if any students would like to share their genogram, if they're comfortable. My hand shot up immediately. I'll spare you the details, but I basically give the class a content notice to allow any to leave who may be triggered. And then I just shared all of it. I shared all the relationships and why they were effed up, and why I hate my dad and I couldn't care less if he dies today, and how my sister resents my mom and all that. Cheery smile on my face the whole time. The teacher uncomfortably thanks me for my bravery. A few students shifted in their seats, feeling uneasy. Others smiled. And then my friend volunteered to share. She didn't like the assignment either, but she's not one to argue with teachers. Her presentation trumped mine, as the girl had a real messed up family. And by the end, she was red in the face and everyone was super uncomfortable. The next person to volunteer to share was this girl who was in foster care. I'm not even sure her sharing was malicious compliance, but hers was the most uncomfortable to hear. She started to cry at the end, and another student who also grew up in foster care started to tear up. The teacher cut us off after that. Another teacher overheard, and the following week, we had some serious discussions in the class. I and the other students who shared were referred to the school's mental health center. Another teacher, who I had a good relationship with, checked in with me, and I told her what happened. I can't tell for certain what went on, but it did create a stink in their department. It's been several years since I graduated, but I heard there's now an alternative assignment for the genogram. So the lesson is, don't tell your social work students to do something that you tell them to never do to their clients. And you don't get into social work unless you're traumatized as F. Listen, I'm just glad OP made the teacher sorry they asked. But seriously, what a messed up assignment, right? And in my opinion, what the teacher was making the students do was incredibly unethical. Like fictional families I can stand by, but to get students to use their real experiences and make genograms on themselves so he can read about it, and then to present them in front of everyone, what was he thinking? I also want to say good on the other teachers for calling this one out, and the department for doing something about it. I work at a gas station in Oregon, with half the pumps being self-serve and half being mini-service, which means that we're there to pump your gas for you, but we're not obligated to do anything else, like wash your windshield. But we do when we're asked to be nice. That said, there's a lady that comes in almost every single day, and she gets like $5 or $10 worth of gas. She asked us to wash her windshield, and she never tips. The woman's really weird about it, like it's her little power trip. The last time she was in, it was raining, and she still smugly asked me to wash her windshield. Because, quote, that's your damn job. Being a hardcore customer service guy, I did, but then I thought twice about it after the fact. I go to that length for nice folks, but she's not nice. The woman's bitchy, whiny, and weird. So one day, windshield Karen comes in, and she asked me for $9 of gas. And then, as usual, she asked me to wash her windshield with a smug look on her face. I said I would, but then, by the time I got back out there were a good 8 cars on the pumps. So I told her, I'm sorry, I can't do your windshield right now. It's too busy. Well, the woman gets really snotty with me, and she has me stop the pump, which means that since she paid cash, she needs her change. I thought, okay, you'll get your change. I then went inside, and I told my coworker that I need change on pump number 2. But make sure to vend extra pennies from the safe, and put like 50 of them there, loose. He looked at me like I was crazy, but then I explained who it was for, so he gladly hands me the change. And by the way, we have to wait in line inside the attached convenience store with other customers to get change for gas, because our pump guy often doesn't have their own till open for a shift. So as I was standing in line to get windshield lady's change, she came inside and she was death glaring our other customers. And then she must have seen me waiting and went back to her car. She was already getting snotty with me the moment I walked out to her car. So I put the $3 bills in her hand, and then an absolute cascading assload of pennies and a few nickels on them. And I said, I'm sorry, we're short on silver. And the look on her face. That was the most satisfying use of pennies ever. She was still stammering when she was driving away, and I didn't listen to or identify a single word she said. I'm hoping this will discourage her from coming back, but if it doesn't, we'll once again have a shortage of silver change. But alas, that's the economy that we're in. The times are tough. You know what I say, guys, play silly games, win silly prizes. And for Karen to be that petty about OP not being able to clean her windows and stopping the pump, I'm glad OP got to be petty right back at her and filled her hands with a crap ton of pennies. Or, in his words, a cascading assload of pennies. You deserve it, Karen. So this is my tiny malicious compliance story, which happened in my first year at university. about 8 years ago. I was also a 20-year-old female at the time. The bus I had to take to university was the most popular route in town, meaning it was always packed. Because I got on at the first stop, I always had a window seat, which meant that somebody was usually sitting next to me when I had to get off. I always had to do the awkward thing of lifting my backpack, straightening up in an exaggerated fashion to show them that they had to stand up to let me pass, which was no problem. It was just a bit awkward for socially awkward me. One morning, a guy in his 40s sat right next to me, and he promptly spread across my seat, pushing his leg right up to mine. I thought it was weird, but hey, maybe this guy had a painfully swollen scrotum or something, or no self-awareness, or both. Anyways, I was giving him the benefit of the doubt, and as he was focused on his phone and he ignored me, I did the same the rest of the journey. Then, when we were getting close to my stop, I start the awkward "I have to get off, so let me pass" show. No reaction. I stood up from my seat. Still no reaction. So I spoke up and said, "Sir." Again, no reaction. I then tap his shoulder and I say, "Sir, I need to get off. Can you let me pass?" That's when the guy looked up at me, and with the widest, most disgusting grin on his face, he said, "Well, sweetie, it looks like you're gonna have to squeeze past me, but no problem for such a skinny girl, right?" Some of the passengers standing around us noticed, and they were about to intervene, but I was pissed, because at that point, I had missed my stop, and I wasn't sure if this guy was some sort of a pervert, or he just liked to piss on people's days. But I didn't want him to win. Also, no one had ever called me skinny. I have what one would call childbearing hips, thank you very much. So I smiled at him and said, "Okay, have it your way." My backpack was filled with half a dozen library books that I was going to return that day, and it was bulky and heavy as F. Usually, I would have put it on after leaving the crowded bus, but not that day. I shouldered my backpack so it was hanging to the right, and clumsily and forcefully, and just in case he was indeed a pervert, in no way sexily squeezed past the guy, dragging my huge, heavy backpack across his face. I leaned back to make sure to really get his nose, and if he emitted any pain-filled protest, well, they must have been muffled by my backpack. As I was standing by the door waiting for my next stop, I looked back to see him covering his nose with his hand. It looked like he was checking if he was bleeding, but I don't think he did. The guy might have had a scratch or two from my backpack, but he wasn't injured or anything. The guy's pride was, though. The guy kept glaring at me for the glorious half-minute it took for the bus to reach the next stop. I was in such a good mood that I didn't mind walking back to where I was supposed to get off. I just love how OP dealt with this guy's like way to frickin' go. Like, what a creep who definitely deserved that happening. Oh my goodness. And this person comments, "I thought this was headed to, so I got up on the seat, stepped on his crotch and over him situation. But congratulations on the bag to the face bash." And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy, crazy stories. And if you missed yesterday's episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people episode, where it's all about entitled Karen coworkers, and the stories are wildly, wildly ridiculous. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.